From early on, we're taught how to navigate space in certain ways according to our identities. As we get older, direct and indirect teachings become clear, as do the consequences of choosing to navigate space differently from the status quo. When I say space, I'm talking about multiple forms. Physical space, to institutional space, to emotional, psychological space. When I think critically about these spaces, I see the racist frameworks embedded within them. Racist frameworks being systems, institutions, and cultural norms that protect and glorify whiteness and shape our lives. Everything from who decision makers are, to the policies that impact our access to resources, to the books we read in schools and representation we see in the media. For people of color, learning to navigate these racist frameworks starts young. For me, one of the places I learned this was in school. By the 4th grade, I learned to suppress my family's language for the language of the colonizer in order to fit in. By high school, I learned to feel inadequate when me and my black and brown peers were the last to be selected for groups and advanced placement courses. And by college, I realized of my 18 years of education, I only had 2 instructors of color. Formal education is a paradox because we don't get to navigate that space the same. Formal education taught me curriculum that did not represent me by people who did not look like me in an environment that did not culturally support me. I learned the hard way about the racist framework called democracy. During the fellowship portion of my master's program, I worked as a community organizer in North Dakota during the historic indigenous-led movement against the Dakota Access Pipeline. DAPL, an line originally sited to cross the Missouri River north of the capital of Bismarck, a predominantly white community, was declared to be too high risk and was rerouted to cross just north of Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. This happened even though the tribe expressed the same valid concerns and more because of their ancestral connection to the land. And while the tribe was telling the US government no over and over again, DAPL confidently began to construct without permits. Standing Rock Sioux Tribe put out a call to action to protect water, sacred ground, and a way of life. It resulted in the reunion of the 7 bands of Sioux nations, the Oshetee-Shakoan, and mobilized thousands of water protectors from around the world. People came to Standing Rock because what was happening there was the tip of the iceberg for all the racial, social, environmental, and economic injustice that has always happened in this country. Navigating life during this time was complicated. The paradox was becoming clear. We participated in the democratic processes as described, and our concerns were easily dismissed. We exercised our right to nonviolent demonstrations, and we were met with a militarized response. And to quickly bring it full circle, on the night before Thanksgiving, in freezing conditions out in the prairie, police were using water cannons and gas in an attempt to claim the land from First Nations people. 2016, everybody. It was the first time in my life that I felt like I was living in a pre-civil rights era. On the upside, I felt truly empowered by the values and stories my First Nations family shared with me. And I felt important. I felt that I had a role to play in being on the right side of history. On the downside, I was witnessing so many horrible things, both on the front lines and in my daily life. And as the movement grew and more demonstrations came to Bismarck, partnered with the Trump campaign rhetoric, my local living environment became hostile. I was always hyper aware of my race because I was constantly experiencing forms of racism that made my walks to work and trips to the grocery store daunting. And over time, my world became so loud and so violent that I could never get away. I could never turn it off. It eventually led to anxiety and depression. Sharing these stories is hard, but important. And I now because I'm in a better place, and because the art of storytelling honors our ancestors and their way of teaching. It requires humility, gratitude, and humble listening. Americans are not good listeners. Trust me, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I've read this in more than one place. And because I know this, and because of my experiences, I often have my guard up when white people want to talk about race and diversity without conversations about racist frameworks. I currently have the privilege to work with underrepresented students in a predominantly white institution, shout out to our students today, who are constantly being asked to share their stories of oppression. And I'm finding that I'm protective of that, because I know how hard it is to want to share your story but not be taken for granted, to want to advocate for diversity but not feel tokenized, to want to educate but not be your consultant, and to want to be treated equally but valued for your identity. Our students are paving the way for change, and the work they're doing is so important, but it will only go as far as people are willing to act upon it. So what can we do? I'm not going to leave you on that note like a downer. So what can we do to encourage humble listening and the deconstruction of racist frameworks? For people of color and other underrepresented people, our role is to unapologetically claim space because we belong here. I'm proud to be a millennial because we're known as a bridge to a diverse future. When I look behind me, I see Gen Z, social justice generation. It matters because soon we'll be the majority. In our cultures, family and community come first. We know and value where we come from, and when we make change, we make it from a place of love so that we can all rise. For white people, your role is to do a lot of unlearning. Unlearn the need to make space yours. Unlearn the way you've been taught to listen. Unlearn the discomfort you've been taught accompanies silence. Respect our experiences and embrace vulnerability. Change starts with us. It's how we treat each other, how we listen, how we teach. I challenge you to navigate space mindfully, to be curious, to be kind. And as one of our student leaders often says, keep one another in check with love and respect. Thank you.